Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to create a ranking system that combines both fundamental and technicals. And in this example, I'm going to be using our intraday technical ranks. So if this is your first time watching this, I suggest you watch the playlist on creating a technical ranking system, as I'm going to be using those results and just apply the fundamental ranks. So there's no reason to recalculate our technical scores. Now in my previous video, or the first video in this playlist, we'll show you how to bring in our fundamentals that we've collected using the Trader API. And in order to calculate the fundamental scores for each of the stocks, we're going to request all of our fundamental files that we've been collecting each week via the Trader API. Now, I suggested you run that script every week. For me, I run that every Friday. And the way we're going to handle our fundamentals for each of the stocks is that for each of those files, we're going to apply those fundamentals for each of the stocks the following week. And that's all handled within this function. Our first wrapper just brings in all of the tech scores that we have already calculated. So in summary, what the script will do is we're going to list all of our files for the fundamentals. If this is your first time running this, then we would need to omit line 114, since this will just calculate for the latest day or the latest bar, since we're using intraday data, and all of those files will get passed into get hybrid scores. But before we go into that function, let me show you what this first one does. So we need to pass in our look back period, our start and end date. And if you go back to my tutorial on calculating technical scores, I showed you that I'm using a look back period of 1 day, 2 days, and 3 days. So in other words, I'm using my 15-minute bars for the Q's constituents and I'm looking back 1, 2, and 3 days to calculate those tech scores, which are saved in different folders. So this will just list my files depending on the look back period I choose. It'll go ahead and read all the files in and then return that as a data frame. So as a reminder, I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. These are all the technical scores for the Q's constituents, and I have calculated the technical scores ranging back to May 1st. So what we're going to need from this table is our tech score, our symbol, date, and price. So back in the script here, you'll notice that we have a start and end date. We subset our data between those periods, and we want to limit the columns to the symbol, date, price, and tech score. And I'm going to add the look back period as a column, just as a reminder for myself. So if we run lines 9 through 16, we will see our table condense to only 5 columns, and our data starts from 9/9, since that was our start date that I passed in. And I haven't collected Friday's data, so this should go to 9/12. Depending on how and where you save the data for your technical scores, just make sure you bring in these 5 columns and modify that wrapper. Now for the second function, we're going to pass in our fundamental data, and what that will do is first we're going to read in that file. We're going to make sure that the asset type is equity, and we're going to add 2 columns. The first one is the close price, so our fundamental data that returned from the Trader API did not include a close price, but we can easily calculate that by dividing the market cap and the shares outstanding. We're also going to add the get date of when we requested this data. Now here's where you have to be selective on how you want to calculate your fundamental scores. So for me, I'm just going to subset the symbol, the price to cash flow ratio, our gross margin, our net profit margin, along with our operating margin, the return on equity, the total debt to equity, our earnings per share, percentage change, our revenue change, the number of shares outstanding, the market cap, and our close price. So again, you can pick and choose what columns you want to keep to calculate your fundamental score. Since the column names are pretty lengthy, I just removed the fundamental part to shorten them. So for me, my fundamental data frame will look something like this. And again, this is coming from the Trader API. Now, as you'll notice, I have data for 50 stocks, even though the Q's constituents involve around 100 different stocks. So the reasoning for that is that if we go back to our script, I condensed my fundamental table where these ratios are all greater than 0. So in other words, I only want to keep stocks that have good ratios to begin with. Next, I'm going to add a column for the operating cash flow. So you can see my calculation here where I divide the close price by the price to cash flow ratio multiplied by the number of shares outstanding. Next, what I do is I create a sequence of dates. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the fundamentals that we collected on a Friday and apply those for the following week. So here I'm just going to pick the first Monday in that sequence of dates and the last Friday within that sequence. So as an example, for the data that I collected on September 6th, which was a Friday, I'm going to apply those fundamentals for the following week, which is September 9th through the 13th. Next, I'm just going to keep all the columns with the ratios along with the operating cash flow as I showed you in fund. Now we're going to bring in our table with all of our tech scores. so that we don't have to recalculate everything using our first function. So that'll get saved into text scores. Now we need to make sure that all of our stocks are within our fund and our text scores. So I'm going to extract all the stocks in our text scores along with all of the stocks in our fund. And here I'm just making sure that our fundamentals and technical scores contain the same stocks. Now we can begin ranking our fundamentals in line 75 through 82. And since I have 8 fundamental ranks, I'm going to use a scale of 1/8. I'm going to multiply each of those ratios by 1/8. And since I'm adding these, I'm going to go ahead and multiply the final score by 8, just so I can get an absolute score, which will get saved as a column here. I'm going to add that fundamental score to our technical score data frame along with the hybrid score. Here for the hybrid score, what I'm doing is giving it a weight. So I'm going to apply 70% weight on the technical and 30 on the fundamental, but this is really up to you. I'm also going to add the number of shares outstanding and the market cap as columns, which I will show you how to use these in future tutorials. Now we can begin saving our hybrid scores as tables. So up to this point, I'll show you what your data should look like. So for text scores, you're going to see your table that you brought in from the technical scores for the first 5 columns. And we just added our fund score along with the hybrid score, the number of shares outstanding, and the market cap. And since we passed in the file that we've collected from the Trader API from September 6th, we have data from September 9th all the way to September 12th. So the final step in the function is to extract the unique dates or timestamps within this data frame. If this is your first time running it, then you need to exclude line 104, as this will just subset the data for the latest bar. And for each of those unique timestamps, it'll subset our data. So as an example, I have this data frame subset. So we only have 50 entries, all for the 9:30 bar on September 9th. So it's going to iterate through each of those bars and save it in the path that you specify here. So the final output should generate multiple files with the hybrid score for each of the bars. So in my next tutorial, I'm going to be showing you guys how to run an optimization to see if it's a good idea to hold some of these stocks with a high hybrid score and see what those returns look like. But with that, guys, this concludes the video. I hope this was useful information. I'll leave a link down in the description area to my Patreon where you can find the script. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.